Hundreds of you have DM'd me to check out this classic recording of Tiger Rag by Art Tatum. His performance is incredible. It's one of my all-time favorites. It's technically astounding, the harmonies are amazing, and it's a song that has made even the best performers cry. There are techniques in here that I've never learned, but with a sound like this, I have got to try it. So this video took me nearly 6 weeks to make. Trying to break down Art Tatum in just a few minutes is quite a challenge. Now, I'm quite comfortable with stride and ragtime, and I've pulled off some pretty technical pieces before, so this is right up my alley, but I do have some apprehensions. First of all, Tatum's playing is full of these virtuosic runs up and down the piano. And we need to figure out exactly how those runs work. Secondly, the harmonies are so unique, especially for music from the 1930s. It's not immediately obvious to me what these voicings are. So we need to transcribe some of these chords and sort that out. And lastly, I want to figure out some of the hand coordination. Honestly, when I listen to recordings like this from Tatum, it sounds like there are two people playing. And I'm just not sure how one man is physically playing all of it live. So the most authentic reference that we have for this is, of course, the original recording. But to figure out some of these techniques, I think we're going to need more than that. There are a couple other performances of this here on YouTube, but this one in particular by Elder is about as close as I have ever seen another person come to playing it authentically to the way Tatum played it. Now, before you jump into the comments and point out all of the notes that I transcribed incorrectly, let me remind you where we're coming from. Okay, cut me some slack. So Art opens this up in a rubato style with some really interesting opening chord voicing. As I look at what I transcribed, you could call these dominant 7th sharp 11 chords, which would be technically correct. But I think Art is actually thinking about this a little bit differently. Barry Harris used to talk about the relationship between the whole tone scale and these dominant chords, especially dominant chords that had these sharp 11s in it. And that's what I think about when I see these chord voicings. The specific voicing that Tatum is using here is pretty interesting. He plays a straight major triad in his left hand, but the right hand is playing an augmented triad that's a whole step higher. So for this first chord, he's playing a G-flat major triad in his left hand, and he's playing an A-flat augmented in his right. Tatum was kind of famous for his use of the whole tone scale and this augmented harmony, which are two of the same things, by the way. Augmented chords are just triads that you make by alternating notes of the whole tone scale. So this whole tone augmented harmony is something that we should keep our ears open for as we keep going through the piece. So here he's taken that same whole tone voicing and he's just moved it quickly up through the scale. It's one thing to see it here on the page and understand what's going on, but I'm going to have to really woodshed it to get this one under my hands. So to get us out of this rubato introduction and into the main Tiger Rag theme, Art gets us there with this big dominant 7th arpeggio. In this case, it's an F7 arpeggio that's going to lead us into the key of B flat. But notice that there's a sharp 5 in here because the sharp 5 keeps us in the whole tone sound. This main theme is just such a classic stride period sound. It's what we would expect to hear from Tatum, or from Fats Waller, or from the other big stride players of the day. Tatum's technique is on a completely different level. The rhythm and articulation of his right hand is just so clean. That right there, that big descending arpeggio thing, that's the Tatum sound that I want to figure out and put into my own playing. What is that? So it's a big E-flat 6 chord, and it sounds to me like he's alternating between the top notes of the chord and then alternating the bottom notes of the chord, and kind of repeating that pattern down each octave of the piano. This is another E-flat 6 arpeggio just like the last one, but instead of coming down, this time we're going up. and Tatum's left hand is just so freaking solid. I have bigger hands than the average pianist, so these tenths are doable for me. I can span and walk tenths, no problem. But to play this kind of left-hand pattern, Tatum must have had like Shaquille O'Neal-sized hands. What's crazy to me is just how much his hands are jumping all over the keyboard. I mean, keep in mind that Tatum was completely blind in one eye and almost completely blind in the other. I mean, he couldn't see a damn thing. I just don't understand how it was possible for him to do this. This section in the middle is probably my favorite part of this whole recording, and it's not the most difficult to play. I mean, relatively speaking, it's probably the easiest part of the piece to play. My all-time favorite recording of Tiger Rag actually is from the Canadian Brass. They call it the tuba Tiger Rag because the tuba player gets the melody. The tuba player plays this trill while he's running around the stage charging the other musicians. It's just really fun to watch. This riff is super cool, and it confused me for a few minutes until I realized that it's the same voicing that we already talked about in the introduction. The major triad in the left with the augmented triad a whole step up in the right. This is what the third or the fourth time that we've seen him apply the same technique, the same voicings to this tune. He's getting a lot of mileage out of the time he spent practicing this voicing. We've talked a lot about the fancy things he's doing in his right hand, but let's look at the structure, the stride pattern that he's doing in his left hand. I think he's thinking about this as walking tenths, but he's alternating the root and the tenth above in eighth notes instead of playing them together, and he's just filling in the chord tones along the way. This line, this is just some kind of fancy chromatic scale. It's one of these things that's just so crazy technical that it really sets him apart from any of his contemporaries at the time. It's basically a chromatic scale that's going up, but every other note of the scale is harmonized with a third. So as I've gone through it very slowly, I kind of see two different things at play here. So what I notice is my thumb is responsible for white keys, and it just plays straight up the scale. And in between each of the notes that my thumb is playing, my other fingers play a third on the black notes above it. And so my hand kind of does this rocking motion as you move it up the piano. There's another one of these movements. It's the same thing that we've seen 3 or 4 times so far. It's that same whole tone voicing. Actually, no, I don't think that's right. It is the same movement that we saw before with the whole tone scale, but these are not augmented whole tone triads. These are diminished triads. I actually think that's kind of an interesting observation because anything we've done with these augmented triads are things that we could also do with diminished triads to get a different sound. It's like the same technique, but 2 different outcomes. I swear our Tatum has 3 hands. He must have 3 hands. The right hand is clearly playing these chord stabs up here on the top of the piano, right? It has to be. And the walking bass down here on the bottom has to be played by the left hand. So then who in the world is playing this tenor line? I mean, I guess this tenor line has to be played by the left hand. At its most, it's only a tenth away. I can reach it. But come on. I mean, give me a break. No. This, I don't know what to say here except just to tip my hat to Tatum. This just does not seem possible. So I think this is basically the same chromatic line that we broke down a second ago, alternating our thumb on white and our other fingers on black. We're just going in the other direction. The arpeggio that we end on here is the same arpeggio we broke down earlier. It's just bringing us back home to the one chord in A flat. Wait, what the hell? Were we in B flat? How did we get to A flat? I didn't even hear a key change. This approach that we just went through is my method called DUPE. D-U-P-E. Deconstruct, understand, play exercises. It's how I learned to take something off of a recording and put it into my hands into something that I can play over any tune. This is the same method that I use to teach jazz in my fundamentals course, which you can pick up in the description below for 30% off. There's over 75 different lessons in that course that are the result of going through this DUPE process. There are a handful of techniques that we observed in Tiger Rag that we need to practice so that they become part of our playing. The first is the use of whole tone harmony, especially these augmented triads, and all of these kind of fun movements where he arpeggiates them going up and down the scale. The second observation we made were these lightning fast lines that run up and come back down the piano. And what we learned was that these are harmonically pretty simple. They're basically 6th chords or dominant 7th chords. But what makes them interesting is the unique patterns, the hand-twisty patterns that he uses to arpeggiate them. Our third observation is this third hand technique, where his left hand is doing 2 jobs at the same time, both covering the bass and also covering a movement in the tenor line. I also want to try and honor the spirit of Tatum's performance, the attitude that he brought. So much of that was his relationship with other pianists in the room. So I want to find some kind of movement that is so technically difficult and requires my huge gargantuan hands that only I can play it, so that I can sit at the piano in front of other pianists and intimidate them in the same way that Tatum intimidates me. And so now the hard work begins. I need to spend the time at the piano to practice these techniques until I can play them comfortably, and then I need to practice applying them to the standards that I already know how to play on my gigs. Speaking of which, I think you will really enjoy this next video where I break down a crazy Latin big band groove. Check it out.